Hey everyone, welcome back to Here at Apologetics. So pumped you're joining us today. Today I have Bram Rawlings. You're going to be running to the Counter Apologist on the Resurrection. Bram, how's it going?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing good. A little sleep deprived, but that's the life
Yep.
of a college student halfway through the semester. I'm really looking forward to this. It's going to be a lot of fun. So today we're going to be running to a video by Counter Apologist on his countering the argument for the resurrection. And we're going to be talking about miracles and prior probability and all kinds of fun stuff. So before we get into it, Bram, do you have anything you want to say?
Well, not really, other than I'm excited. And thanks for having me on, Zach.
Yep, and there's a link down below for Bram, so you can follow Bram's great content, and we're going to dive right in. So we're going to get started with this clip. We're going to play pretty much just straight through, and we're going to pause at bits, and yeah, it's going to be really good. So let's get started.
What if I told you that I believe that God raised Jesus from the dead, but that I did not believe that Jesus was the Son of God, and denied that belief in his death and resurrection was the path to salvation and eternal life and reconciliation with the one true God, Yahweh? That would just sound crazy, right? I want you to think about why that sounds crazy. It's not hard to find an answer, because we assume that miracles are evidence for the truth of the philosophical and theological teachings of the miracle worker. This assumption goes unstated when apologists use the argument for the resurrection, but it is absolutely central to the argument. The principle is even endorsed in the Bible in 1 Kings 18. At the time of the sacrifice, the prophet Elijah stepped forward and prayed, "Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant and have done all these things at your command. Answer me, Lord, answer me, so that these people will know that you, Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again." Then the fire of the Lord fell and burned up the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and the soil, and also licked up the water in the trench. When the people saw this, they fell prostrate and cried, "The Lord, he is God! The Lord, he is God!" The story of Elijah is about him demonstrating that his God is the true God, whereas the prophets of Baal worship a false God, because Elijah's God can work miracles, but the prophets of Baal can't get their God to do the same. The idea is that, like God sending fire from the sky to burn a wet altar, or a person rising from the dead, it would be evidence for the truth of the teachings of the miracle worker. I want you to keep this thought in the back of your mind as we go through this video countering the argument for the resurrection of Jesus. I'm countering the resurrection argument in a very specific way. My aim is to debunk the argument as it is used specifically as a means to convert non-Christians into Christians, as well as to counter the idea that Christians remain in their faith due to any supposed strength that is in the historical argument for the resurrection of Jesus. Typically, the resurrection argument is presented as the capstone to a cumulative case apologetic presented by Christians to convert atheists and agnostics into new believers. The plan is to use a series of arguments to convince the skeptic that a monotheistic God exists, and then to bridge the gap from theism to Christianity with the argument for the resurrection. My purpose here is to show exactly why this doesn't work.
Alrighty, great place to start, Bram. I'll leave it to you to start, kind of leave your thoughts and what you think about what he's got going on.
Yeah, well, I find this a little peculiar. He's saying that, for example, in the case of 1 Kings 18, verses 20 through 40, where, you have that situation with Elijah, and he tests the prophets of Baal, and he says, look, if Baal is the true God, call Baal and call down fire, and see if you get fire. But I'm going to call down fire from Yahweh, and fire comes from Yahweh, but fire does not come from Baal. And it seems obvious to me, at least, that if we take a certain hypothesis and call it H, and in this situation, H is that Yahweh is Israel's true God, then H predicts that in that situation, Yahweh will, give Elijah fire. And the fact that Elijah does find fire is evidence for H. The same applies to Jesus's resurrection. If our hypothesis is that Jesus is God incarnate, or our hypothesis is that Christianity is true, H predicts that Jesus will rise from the dead. And if we find positive evidence that Jesus did rise from the dead, that's evidence that H is true. And if H is true, then you should follow Jesus's teachings. So yeah, I kind of I have a hard time seeing where he's coming from here. But then again, he might clarify later down the road. So I want to give him the benefit of the doubt there.
Yeah, I mean, we got a lot of work to go, lots of clips. I mean, one thing I do want to say, like on the outset, is like I'm not going to agree with the notion that only Christianity has miracles. It's like I believe in that other supernatural beings that can be active in other religions. Like you can look at like Michael Heiser in the Unseen Realm. So like with reference to First Kings, like nowhere does this passage deny the existence of other spiritual beings outside of Christianity, just that like Yahweh is supreme, which is an important thing to think about in my view as we're going to kind of progress forward with this video. So that's the only thing I wanted to put out there.
Yeah, he's the Most High God, yes.
Let's get into this next clip.
The argument for the resurrection comes in many forms, but they all eventually come back down to referencing the Bible stories about Jesus being crucified and resurrected. They are all based on testimonial evidence for a miracle occurring in the past, and unfortunately for Christians, testimony cannot be used in an evidential way to justify belief in a miracle claim in the world we live in. That is what my first argument will be addressing. Now, what if I told you that I woke up in my bed in New Jersey this morning, and then had lunch on the moon, and then was here home on Earth for dinner? You probably wouldn't believe me. Now let's pretend we're in the universe of Star Trek: The Next Generation. My same statement about waking up on Earth, eating lunch on the moon, and then being back on Earth for dinner would be extremely plausible, and you wouldn't bat an eye at that same statement if you were living in that universe. The difference is the background knowledge in each case. In Star Trek, there are transporters that can span an incredible distance in a second, not to mention Galaxy-class starships that make such a feat possible. In the real world, only a handful of human beings have undergone the training and incredible journey via rocket spacecraft to make it to the moon, a process that takes a lot longer than a day. Now, what if my statement was about me doing something physically impossible that no level of technology can overcome? How much more unbelievable would that be? Our entire lives, we build on this background knowledge about how the world works. Science reveals to us that the regularities in the way the physical world behaves can be quantified by certain mathematical equations. It is predictable. It always behaves according to these equations, which we have come to call the laws of nature.
Okay, so next clip here, we're talking about miracles and stuff. Where do you want to take it, Bram?
There's kind of a lot to respond there. Well, the first thing he said is that testimony cannot be used in an evidential way for a miracle. And that just seems like a completely arbitrary restriction to me. If a miracle happens, it seems like we'd expect there to be some testimony about it. And thus, if a miracle happened, it would likely predict testimony. Therefore, testimony is evidence that a miracle happened. Testimony of a miracle, that is. Now, whether that testimonial evidence can be better explained by another hypothesis, that's another question, and that's where we get into debates about, what criteria are needed for these kind of things, and to sift between good testimony and bad testimony, etc. But we're going to bring that up later. What else did he say? While I'm thinking, why don't you go ahead and say something?
Yeah, so I think in part, so justification is ultimately person based. I can't I believe the counter apologist's name is John. I can't force John to believe something say the miracles are possible, because I'm sure he thinks that miracles don't occur. So if he hasn't witnessed any miracles, that's fine. But in terms of the argument for the resurrection, we're gonna need a little bit more than that. And I'm gonna I'm gonna block the notion that most people kind of agree that there are no miracles. It's a very Western idea to claim that there are no miracles, which is something that we're gonna get into further as we keep going. Probably most of the world believes in miracles. It's just this thin select group of people, mostly in the West, that deny the existence of miracles. But I mean, justification is person based, so it's going to depend on your background knowledge and how you think about these things. And I don't want to just be that person that just slams Craig Keener's book at people, but there are people that are actually looking at this and studying this. So it's not this is just something that's totally undocumented or anything. So that's really what I wanted to say at this clip.
Yeah, and well, there kind of is a danger in getting in a circular argument here. If you just reject a priori millions and millions of miracle claims on the basis that people don't experience them, well, that's obviously a circular argument. I'm not saying that's exactly what he's doing here. I'm just saying that there's a danger of doing that. Also, I want to critique the way he actually assumes, I do want to critique the way he actually calculates this background evidence and what evidence he finds relevant as background evidence. But I think I'm going to wait on that when he starts talking about that more. So, yeah.
Okay, good stuff. Let's keep on going. We have a lot of clips today, guys, so that's why it's on 1.5 speed for the counter apologist video. So that's why we're going away.
When philosopher David Hume formulated this argument, he defined a miracle as a violation of the laws of nature, which he admitted a God could do if one existed. I think it is a pretty good definition, but many apologists spend a lot of time attacking it for some reason that I don't quite understand, since the argument doesn't depend on that definition at all. So for our purposes, we could still formulate the argument saying that God governs the behavior of our physical reality according to specific mathematical equations so that it behaves that way regularly, but a miracle is when he allows that regularity to be interrupted. The end result is the same. The regular way the world behaves is incredibly reliable. So reliable that I have never experienced something physically impossible happening. I'll bet you have never witnessed something physically impossible happening either. In fact, among my social group, I have not heard of anyone experiencing anything in their lives that was literally physically impossible. Given that I'm addressing the use of the resurrection argument on someone who was presumably an atheist or agnostic until the cumulative case recently made them into some kind of mere theist, chances are they haven't experienced something physically impossible happening, otherwise they probably wouldn't have been an atheist or agnostic. So what is it that is supposed to convince us that something physically impossible has happened? After all, just because we haven't experienced something doesn't mean it can't happen, right? We can't simply assume that miracles can't happen.
Okay, another great clip. I feel like we covered a little bit of this, but what do you think, Bram?
Yeah. Do you want to go first? I have a few things to write down. I'm just gonna collect my thoughts really quick.
Yeah. So, like, by assuming like physically impossible, I'm just gonna assume that he needs to make a miracle. Which, when I think of a miracle, I'm just gonna say something that wouldn't occur if atheism is true. It's kind of like how I think about it. Like, we think about a miracle as like some sort of like God's intervention in the world or something like that. And it's a very rough definition. And how I think about miracle. But, like, once again, like, he says that like most people are going to assume that physically impossible events, which I'm sure he's referencing as miracles, don't happen. And it's like, no, that's just not true. Like most people, like, I'm going to pull up a survey after this next clip where it shows that like in 2007 in America, like 80% of people believed in miracles, which is more than people who were like Christians, included like not like irreligious people and whatnot. So like, I'm just going to block this idea that like, well, most people just see a regularity in laws of nature and know that there's like nothing beyond those. It's like, no, that doesn't seem to be true. So that's kind of my big sticking point at this point.
Yeah, and there seems to be some like an unstated assumption here that he's not making explicit, that somehow multiple cases of people not experiencing, people rising from the dead is somehow evidence against the resurrection. But I don't think that's the case, because one, you have the problem of reference classes, which we'll get to in a different clip. But also, I think we have good prior reason to expect that God would order the world in such a way to where it operates predictably, and because this is the kind of thing that's necessary for moral accountability. So we'd expect there to be predictable laws of nature. I'm not really sure how that's evidence, against a resurrection.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, he's building a case. So it's like, we're just positing is like he's building his case up. It's like he's going in like one big swoop, and like he's going to try to make this idea that like there's just this very low prior with miracles, and you look at like converge, like just like different traditions saying different miracles, and like he's going to build his trilemma. So he's building his case, but I'm just trying to show these points, like things that like I'm going to disagree with. So
absolutely. Yeah. And Lucas is in the comments, and he's saying that Keener has cited a lot of firsthand accounts of alleged miracles, as well as Dale Allison. And I'd like to echo that, because, that's true.
Yeah.
These people are, go ahead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I was going to say, like, and we're not saying, like, well, Keener says it, therefore it's true, or, like, Allison says it, therefore it's true. It's just, like, a lot of times, like, it's just presumed that, like, certain things, such as, like, maybe, like, impossible, like, no one's witnessed, like, an actual miracle, like, these things are just assumed, when it's, like, well, most people are actually going to disagree with you. But, yeah.
Christians and other religious believers would tell us that the testimony of others should be enough to justify belief in miracles. After all, we get an incredible amount of our beliefs purely through testimony from other people. All that cool science we learn about, most of us don't do the experiments to prove anything. We simply learn about it, maybe from a more trusted source like a peer-reviewed textbook, and we simply accept it and move on. The problem is that while testimony is absolutely a valid way to infer knowledge, testimony also has its faults. Many of us have been lied to, or someone was just incorrect, and by trusting their testimony, we were incorrect by inference. So at the end of the day, we have to weigh our two sources of knowledge and see what we trust more: the reliability of our inductive experience of the world, where we've not really experienced anything physically impossible happening, versus testimonial claims about physically impossible things happening in ways you can't verify. Given the two, my first argument is that I trust my inductive experience of the world more than I trust testimony which I know can be faulty. I have a lot more inductive experience of the way the world works, adhering to the laws of nature, than I do about testimony being always reliable. This was Hume's point. Testimony in principle can't overcome our inductive experience of the world. My argument is that this is true in almost all cases, with only one exception for young children getting testimony from their parents when they are too young to do anything but accept that testimony from a reliable source and treat it as knowledge. That said, in almost all cases, we are right to be skeptical when someone tells us something that wildly violates our background knowledge. This doesn't mean our background knowledge is always correct. After all, some of the most memorable science lessons involve learning something that generally violates our background knowledge and then having that fact be demonstrated to us in verifiable experiments. I want to stress.
Okay. Place to pause here. What are your thoughts, Bram?
Well, he started out by saying that a lot of Christians say that we should just believe miracle claims based on testimony. And I actually don't know any Christian that thinks so simplistically. It's not true that you should just believe miracle claims based on testimony as a category by itself, because there are differing kinds of testimony. Some testimony is better than others. Um, for example, and I'm going to give a kind of a list of, criteria for miracle claims that we can use to sift through the bad and the good ones later. But let me just, suggest one. If testimony to an event is spread around in a hostile environment, I think we can trust that testimony more than if that testimony is spread around in an environment favorable to the spread of that story, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's good. And the only thing I would add here is just like, once again, like, it's not so. Oh, you can zoom in. Okay, so this is a survey from Pew done in 2007. It should be linked down below, but if it's not, you can still like belief in like miracles among non-religious. It's a Pew survey, really good stuff. And like even among like unaffiliated people, if you look here, your cursor, 55% of the religiously unaffiliated. So in 2007, they surveyed 5,048 people. They believe in miracles. So like this isn't like reserved to like Christians. Like he's going to talk about like the mere theist a little bit, saying like, well, it's going to question their case with like what they can know about like the resurrection and whatnot. But like even like among like the religiously unaffiliated, there seems to be like this common belief that miracles are possible. So just to say to that point, like no, like it's not like most people agree that like there's this uniform way nature works and there's nothing beyond this. It seems like even among like people that aren't like ascribed to like a particular religious tradition, like there is a common belief that like miracles actually happen.
Yeah, and I want to shout out my friend Caleb Jackson here. He's actually working on a book right now, documenting many, many, many contemporary miracle claims, and he's convinced by them. And well, yeah, when that book comes out, I'll be excited to read it. But yeah, just goes to show you that these things cannot be taken for granted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good stuff. Well, we're making good progress, so we'll get on to this next clip.
Stress that this conclusion holds, even if you are a mere theist, especially a recently convinced mere theist. After all, a God can exist, but just not interfere with the physical world. Even if a God could resurrect someone, in your inductive experience in the world, how many times have you witnessed a God raise someone from the dead? It is a virtual certainty that even if a God exists, it doesn't do that. Does my moon lunch scenario become any more plausible if I amend it to say, God transported me to the moon for lunch and then sent me back home for Earth for dinner the same day? If I were to try and use a defense in a murder trial that my concealed carry handgun levitated out of my holster and fired on my hiking companion in the middle of the woods, all to the sound of a demon taunting us, would the jury accept or reject that claim? Would you want the jury to accept that claim? Perhaps you might be thinking that this is a little too quick of a dismissal, regardless of how practical my inference above might be. After all, this is supposed to be about the resurrection argument being used on a newly converted mere theist who now believes that supernatural agents can interfere with the material world. Wouldn't it be closed-minded just to reject the total evidence we have available regarding the physically impossible occurring, even if the counter evidence we have is all based on testimony? I think that even in this scenario, with the newly convinced theist starts to consider the total amount of evidence for miracle claims, they should still reject the testimonial evidence for those miracles occurring, or be forced into disconnecting a miracle occurring from providing evidence for the truth of religion. Let's talk.
Okay, lots of stuff here, Bram. I realized I didn't play it on the screen. And Counter Apologist, you are amazing, and it's good to see you in the chat. But yeah, and I'm sorry that I didn't play your black screen with text on our screen. But yeah, Bram, what are your thoughts here?
This is going by so quickly, so I'm having a hard time remembering this stuff. Do you remember the example that he gave specifically? He said something like, would this scenario become all the more plausible if we said that God did it? Do you remember the example?
Yeah. So in a couple, he talks about one about like the scenario like where him and his friend go camping, and like his friend gets shot, and it's like, well, what if I say it was a demon? Like, well, like a jury's not gonna accept that. And he talks about like saying that like, well, God took me to like the moon and back for lunch. So like a couple scenarios like that.
Yeah. So scenarios like that. No, of course it's not. Doesn't make it the scenario more plausible if we just suggest that God or a demon did it. We'd have to have prior reason to expect that God would do something like this. And in the case of the resurrection, I think we do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. Like that's one of the things I thought about is like you have to look at like the prior probability of God doing certain things. Like it seems like like if there's some reason to like vindicate Jesus or something, well, that's going to raise your prior probability of like a resurrection compared to like going to like the moon and back or something like that.
Yes.
So like there's a lot of things we have to consider like when we're like considering like the possibility of like miracles. Because I think things like healings or even like resurrection seem to be more potentially like in line with God's things purposes than like just taking someone to the moon and back. And with the mere theist, like should the mere theist see like these things like a healing or a resurrection is equally likely as like a divine space tour? Like it seems like to me like healings and miracles are just more likely of a thing because it's more of like what we actually people claim to experience with regards to like miracles and whatnot. So we talked about God having possible reasons to resurrect Jesus, which could raise the prior probability, such as like vindicating his teaching, or if like if you believe in the Judeo-Christian God, and there's a teaching that like God will raise and bring Jesus to life. There's also this question of something interesting with like raising the priors, like why should the mere theist potentially think that there's like some prior probability to like the resurrection? And I'm going to say that like if you believe that God created the world, and you're a mere theist, like surely like there's a good reason to think that God would want to reveal himself. And I'm fine with it being applied to like other religious like central claims like the Quran or Book of Mormon. Like surely like God might want to actually like reveal himself if he went through all this business of like creating the universe. So yeah.
That's why everybody needs to read Swinburne's book. He does a really good job of assessing the prior probability. But you know, another example I give to illustrate what I think to be the flaw in counter apologist argument. Okay, so let's imagine a guy has died. No context, the guy is dead, and then suddenly God raises him from the dead. Now let's imagine a second scenario in which a guy has died, and then a lot of Christians, relatives, church friends, etc., gather around and they start praying for him in Jesus' name. They start praying all night, God, please raise this man, do this for your glory, etc. And the man raises from the dead. In the second scenario, we have God seems to be doing much less of an arbitrary thing, right? And so, again, the difference between the first and the second scenario is that in the first scenario, we can't come assuming that God has as many prior reasons to raise this guy from the dead. It just seems like a random thing that he actually does. In the second scenario, we have much more prior reason to think that God would raise this guy from the dead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good stuff. Yeah. No, I track because like different degrees of like miracle claims are gonna have different priors and whatnot. Yeah, good stuff.
Let's talk about why. There are different levels of miracles. Even Christian apologists will differentiate between levels of miracles. The first level that I like to define are those kinds of events that in principle could be the result of random chance and have a purely naturalistic explanation, but seem unlikely, and so one is at least tempted to infer supernatural causation due to a religious context. This can be broken down into two subclasses. The first is what I call a minor improbable miracle. Events that are physically possible, though surface level unlikely, but seemingly too trivial or likely to have occurred anyway. These events are the sort that your average believer might say that probably were just pure chance and good luck rather than divine intervention. This would be like praying to find your keys, and then when you open your eyes, you immediately see them. The other is what I would call a major improbable miracle. Events that are physically possible but highly unlikely to occur, but they do occur in a religious context. Now, admittedly, it's possible that these events could happen by chance and have no divine intervention occurring, but it seems very unlikely, and the religious context makes believers want to admit this as a miracle. A good example would be a person diagnosed with cancer, going back to the doctor a few weeks after their initial diagnosis, but the night before, they went to their church and were prayed over by the entire congregation. Lo and behold, when they get their next check, the cancer has gone into spontaneous remission. This happens naturalistically, albeit in a small percentage of cases, including in non-religious contexts, but the religious context gives the believer a reason to think it was a miracle. Very often, atheists and skeptics will say that in either of these scenarios, we should immediately reject the supernatural explanation because any possible naturalistic explanation, however unlikely, is far more likely than a divine agent causing a miracle. This has some weight with me personally, but then I'm still an atheist, and I tend to weigh my inductive experience of the regularity of the physical world very highly. But I do think that this is not the only reason I think we ought to prefer the naturalistic explanation for these miracles. Still, atheists often go too far with this line of reasoning. They go so far as to claim that the theist is being unreasonable or irrational in believing that these kinds of miracles that are possible but improbable happen.
Okay, Bram, you still there?
Yeah.
There you are, Mr. Face. Good to see you. And of course, Counter Apologist leaves right as I put the screen up and show his beautiful black screen. So hopefully you still love me. But Bram, what are your thoughts here?
Well, he seemed to just be distinguishing between different kinds of miracle claims, so I don't really have anything to, contest here.
That's literally like on my notes. I'm like, for this part, I'm like, for the sake of this video, I really don't have an issue with this part. Like, yeah, okay, we'll keep on going.
Good job.
Yeah.
One of the best defenses for the reasonableness of justified belief in these miracle claims comes from Christian theologian and apologist Randall Rouser. Here, he references Alvin Plantinga's Reformed epistemology, where he points out that a Christian who has a properly basic belief in Christianity, either due to an innate sense of the divine telling her that Christianity is true, or being raised in a Christian context and given testimony from his trusted authority figures like her parents. What's key here is that the Christian belief is a properly basic belief. It is pre-evidential. Given this set of background knowledge, it is entirely rational for this Christian to come across testimony of a major improbable miracle happening in a Christian context and attribute that event as the divine action of her God. This is because literally everyone assesses the plausibility of a claim on how it comports with their background knowledge. Since the truth of Christianity is part of this Christian's background knowledge due to the rules set out in Reformed epistemology, it is reasonable for her to believe it is a miracle. Conversely, Randall readily admits that what is doing the work here is the background plausibility structure of her Christian life experience, not the evidence of the specific miracle claim. Indeed, Randall readily admits that an atheist hearing the same evidence is similarly rational and justified in rejecting the miracle claim and attributing the event to pure, unlikely natural circumstances. I happen to think that Randall's account here is a good one. If there's anything wrong with his account, it is because there was some problem with Plantinga's Reformed epistemology, which I'm granting is valid for the sake of argument here. But wait, if I'm granting that it's rational for a Christian to believe in these improbable miracles, wouldn't I also have to grant it's rational for the case of a newly convinced mere theist to be convinced that miracles have occurred? No, because what is doing the work in Randall's scenario is the pre-existing basic belief in a specific religion, which the mere theist does not have. The mere theist, in this hypothetical case, is not considering the total amount of evidence on offer.
Okay, so interesting stuff here, Bram. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I don't want to comment on Reformed epistemology because I don't have the credentials to do that. And I haven't delved into that topic. I've read Plantinga's Warranted Christian Belief, or part of it. And I know that there's, a debate between an externalist kind of epistemology and an internalist epistemology and all that. So I feel like that's just a topic I'm not prepared to comment on.
Yeah, no, I mean, Reformed epistemology is fine with me, like, for the sake of this video and whatnot. And like, once again, like, I'm just going to say, like, the mere theist probably believes in miracles. Like, well, one, the mere theist is probably going to believe that, like, God created the universe. So that's kind of a big thing. I mean, this question of, like, if I was a mere theist, like, well, if God created this universe, well, why? Is there some sort of purpose? Well, maybe they'd raise the probability of, like, certain religions being true because maybe God wanted to reveal himself or something like that. So, yeah, I just basically agree with that. And I mean, like, obviously justification is person-based. Like, if you are really convinced that, like, God does not exist, like, then yeah, it's going to take a lot of evidence to believe in miracle. But yeah, so I'm fine with most of that. So,
and here might be a good spot to comment on just his unstated assumption concerning background evidence. And his unstated assumption concerning background evidence is that the relative background evidence for assessing the prior probability of Jesus' resurrection is looking at how many people have not risen from the dead. And I think that there's a huge problem with this, and it's the problem of reference class. And I would say that Jesus's unique identity, his moral teachings, his implicit and explicit claims to be the Messiah and to be one with God, to be God himself, all put him in this unique category, in a unique reference class. And as far as I know, the only amount of people that actually fit in that reference class, I think there's one, and it's Jesus. And so we have to assess the prior probability of Jesus' resurrection, not by looking at how many people have not risen from the dead, but I think by looking at, reasons why we should expect God to vindicate Jesus in some way. And I think we have good reasons to think that.
Yeah, it's good stuff. Let's get into this next clip.
Counting Mike's retelling of near-death experiences.
I do want to say, we just jumped ahead about 6 minutes. So what he did here is he had a couple clips from Lacona talking about miracles and then, like, just miracle claims from other religions. And here's kind of the point of, like, showing this.
and then reading near-death experiences of people around the world who observe non-Christian faiths, talking about how they saw things that were in line with their religion's vision of the afterlife, and those who claim to have seen figures of all the world's religions commingling in some kind of feel-good afterlife party. What Lacona and many apologists do is commit the fallacy of understated evidence. This is where the general fact of a situation supports one's conclusions, but the specific facts of that same situation end up undermining your conclusion. The general fact that there are a lot of non-verifiable, implausible miracle claims would seem to support the idea that a supernatural realm exists. However, once we look more closely at the data, the specific details undermine the idea that the supernatural exists, or at the very least, that miracles can serve as evidence for the truth of a specific religion. We see a wide variety of equally well-attested miracle claims that would be strong evidence for contradictory religions. This ends up putting the theist in a trilemma. 1, some of the miracles occurred but not others, but we are left with no objective way to determine which were true and which were false. 2, all of the miracles occurred, but then miracles can't be used as evidence for the truth of the theological teachings of the miracle workers. Or 3, none of the miracles actually occurred and the testimony is based on fabrication and or legends. To understand why we are left thinking the most probable option in the trilemma is that all of these improbable miracle claims are false, we need to look at the second class of miracles that I alluded to earlier.
Okay, so here he sits in his trilemma. So what are your thoughts, Bram?
Well, I think that the first prong of that trilemma is wrong. I don't think that, first of all, I don't think that all these miracle claims are equally well attested, and I don't think that we are stuck in a dichotomy of either having to accept them all and take them at face value, or having to reject them all. And so I put together a list. A lot of it was based on Tim McGrew's work, of criterion that we can use to distinguish good miracle claims from bad miracle claims. So one is geographical distance. If an event, let's say, is reported to have happened in India, but the report itself is written in, I don't know, Jerusalem, that's going to be a problem because no one is likely to travel to India to actually check to make sure that, there are any remains of that event happening or anything like that. Temporal distance is also important. A report of an event that's written 30 years after the fact is of much more evidential value than a report of an event written 300 years after the fact. Open inquiry, so perhaps an event which leaves behind traceable remains which anybody can go and check for themselves. And I would argue that the empty tomb is such a traceable remain. Environment, is the environment favorable or hostile? So in other words, if I report an event, let's say I saw you levitate, Zach, and you have much more reason to trust my weird claim if I'm reporting that in an environment where the sword is against me rather than in an environment where it's pointed away from me. Does the miracle claim confirm or disconfirm pre-existing opinions? In the case of the resurrection, it certainly does not, because messianic expectations before Jesus' resurrection were very different than after Jesus' resurrection. Are human motives like money, power, and sex served? And lastly, do we have prior reason to think that God would perform this miracle? So yeah.
Yeah, no, that's super good. We do have a super chat before we get into my thoughts. So thank you so much, Caleb Jackson, which says, have you all counter apologists read books on medically documented miracles such as Keener, Brown, Duffin, missed testimony but not MRI? I mean, I've read a little bit of Keener's miracles. I haven't finished it yet. And then I've read a little bit on NDEs, but I don't know if that's probably not going to be the same category. So I don't know if you have anything, Bram.
Caleb, I'm just waiting for your book to come out.
He's going to say, I read Caleb Jackson. That's what Bram's going to say. And I'm hopefully going to read Caleb Jackson too. It sounds really cool. So thank you so much for your super chat, Caleb.
I'm aware of some medically documented reports, but again, that might be a little outside of my expertise, if you want to call it that.
Yeah. And once again, I'm just going to get back to the clip from John, the counter apologist. And I don't have any problem with supernatural events in other religions. Maybe Smith healed someone because in my religious view, God, there's other supernatural beings. And I think it's the biblical worldview. seems to express that there are other supernatural beings that have some level, not the same as like Yahweh, it's some level of power in this world to like do things like that. So I think when we're looking at like the truth of religion, like how do we evaluate the things, there's going to be a relevant difference with regards to like the truth of the religion. So like the truth of Christianity hangs on the resurrection. The truth of like the Book of Mormon hangs on like did Joseph really get those plates? The Quran is like the word for word recitation of like Allah or something like that. Kind of spitballing here. So like those things are going to be, I think, a lot more like in a prior probability sense more likely to be true because they're dealing with like religiously significant claims on like whether it's true or not. And then a resurrection is like that's obviously gonna be a big difference, and like I'm fine with that with different worldviews. And like if you read like Miracles by Craig Keener, he talks about like Jesus' miracles are very different than other miracle workers in the world at the time. Like the only one that's similar is Apollonius of Tyre, who's going to appear in the 3rd century, way after the Christian miracle circuit stories are known. So like there's a very big difference here in the Christian story.
Well,
so yeah,
I mean, but the evidence for Apollonius of Tyre is terrible.
Apologetics
was straight up fabricating some of that material, and that's demonstrably true. And you know, it comes hundreds of years, or about a century and a half after Jesus's after the Gospels, I believe. I was gonna say something, but I can't remember what I was gonna say. So I might come back to it.
We can play the next clip because we got a few more, and maybe it'll come back to you. So yeah.
Oh, I remember what I was gonna say.
Miracles that
it won't take long. Yeah, I would agree with you that I think Christianity allows for miracles and supernatural events to occur in other religions, and I think the Bible actually teaches that. In Exodus, you know, you have the Egyptians being able to produce miracles, and some Christians might say, well, we shouldn't take that literally or anything like that. But interestingly enough, it's only when you take the Bible more literally rather than less literally that you actually get a Christianity that allows for other miracles in other religions. So yeah,
a
little bit counterintuitive actually.
that have no natural explanation. The second class are miracles that do something physically impossible. These miracles would have no naturalistic explanation whatsoever. Examples of these sorts of things abound in religious texts and other accounts. Raising people from the dead after a sufficient period of time has elapsed past death would be a great example. This category, much like the previous one, has 2 types. The kind that are not empirically verifiable, like one-off events. One example would be if a prophet were to tell a scientist who is measuring the momentum of a particle that particle's exact position. Heisenberg's uncertainty principle tells us that we cannot know the exact momentum if we also measure the exact position. So it would be a miracle to have both values, but we could never verify the value that we were given was correct. Miracles could be empirically verifiable in the moment, but then quickly lapse into being non-verifiable, like Jesus walking on the surface of unfrozen water. While verifiable to those present, it quickly would become unverifiable once he got off the water. The other version of this miracle are the kind that are empirically verifiable, so ones where we would have extensive empirical evidence regarding someone having an amputated limb and then living that way for some time, say reliable medical records, photos, videos of them without the limb, only to have the limb regrow, preferably with the miracle taking place on video. Another could be a set of rocks floating in the air continuously for thousands of years in an area that spell out, I am the Lord God and Jesus is my son, written out multiple times in multiple languages. Finally, there is the third example that is not often considered. God continually working miracles that are physically impossible through adherence of the one true religion, consistently and in empirically verifiable ways. The last example is important because in all but a few cases, the empirical verifiability of a miracle is a time-limited thing. An amputation that occurred a couple hundred years ago, healed by a prayer, would be empirically verifiable to those at the time, but would not be empirically verifiable today. The event lapses into being non-verifiable. Only the second kind, where the miracle was done in perpetuity, could it be verified over time.
Okay, good place to cut off here for a moment, Bram. Do you have any more thoughts and things that we haven't really covered yet?
Yeah, well, even if a miracle is not directly verifiable, I think we're still justified in believing it if we have sufficient trustworthy testimony about that miracle. And I would say that in the case of Jesus' resurrection, we do. Again, I don't think there's any reason to arbitrarily cut off historical testimony as evidence that can be validly used to believe a miracle claim.
Yeah, I mean, like once again here, like I don't think that like God's some sort of like lab dummy where you have to like he has to like oblige to respond in some sort of like repeatable, testable way to like do miracles. Like this is gonna get a little bit into like divine hiddenness. Like I'm sure like we think like God is hidden to some degree because it allows for certain things such as like creaturely freedom and like autonomy and things which may be good because it may help us to like have a deeper relationship with God and whatnot. So like I think we're in a situation where like it's reasonable to believe in miracles, and like I think it's also reasonable to not believe in miracles. Like I'm not like going to scream from the hilltop like atheism is irrational or something. I just think that like there's good evidence both like. I'm not gonna say there's evidence both ways because I think it leans very much in like favor of miracles, but God's hidden to some degree because it allows us to come to like reason and think about these things and try to make our own decisions and not just be like forced to come to certain conclusions because it's just like there's just no way a rational person could deny like the negation or something.
Yeah. Well, and I think this is why I'm excited for part 2 when we're going to be actually talking about the historical posterior evidence, and I think that's where the crux of the resurrection argument comes from. So yeah.
Yeah, good plug for part 2, which should be out in a few weeks. We have to schedule it and figure it out because this is a long video. It's like an hour long, so we're just cutting it in half. But yeah, plug for the future.
Or where we have believers able to do the miracle throughout generations. Now, when evaluating the second class of miracles, we should note that the first class of these physically impossible miracles are a lot like the other cases of what I call improbable miracles, in that they are not verifiable. In order for either side to not beg the question, we cannot really know whether these miracles actually occurred. What's more, if we just accept all testimony about these kinds of non-verifiable miracles at face value, then various contradictory religions around the world have many testimony-based claims of this sort, meaning that miracles can no longer count as evidence for the truth of theological teachings of the miracle workers. So, again, like the last category, we're left with a trilemma. 1, some of the miracles occurred, but not others, and we are left with no objective way to determine which were true and which were false. 2, all of the miracles occurred, but then miracles can't be used as evidence for the truth of the theological teachings of the miracle workers. Or 3, none of the miracles actually occurred, and the testimony is based on fabrications and or legends. What gets interesting is that the final category of the physically impossible miracle ends up being evidence for the third option, where none of the miracles have occurred.
Okay, what do you think here, Bram? He's getting back to that trilemma.
Yeah, and I would restate my objection to the first prong of the trilemma. I don't think we have any reason to accept this false dichotomy that he's proposing between, accepting all miracle claims, which he just assumes are equally well substantiated, or accepting none of them. Yeah.
Yeah, and like once again,
you
like
have to get into the weeds and actually do the historical work, right?
Yeah, and like once again, it's gonna have to come down to like especially like the religiously significant miracles. Like so, like if you have a Christian view of things in which there's spiritual beings like demons or like things in other religions, then the probability of expecting like miracles in other religions, like you'd expect that. Like so, like potentially, like if your worldview like allows for like other things, like other spiritual beings, then potentially you're gonna expect these miracles in other religions. Like this isn't like something that like the Christian can't accept or something like that. And then once again, like we're gonna get into these like religiously when I think there's a relevant different when we're looking at like religiously significant miracles that establish like the truth of the religion or whatnot, like the resurrection or like the golden plates of like Mormonism or something like that. Then like I think there's going to be a higher probability to certain things, assuming like if you believe God exists, because like maybe God actually wants to like reveal himself after going through like the trouble of creating a universe and whatnot. So I'm just gonna kind of that's how I'd probably block the trilemma, is saying that just because there's miracles in other religions, that doesn't mean that necessarily that we cannot come to theological truth. Because I think there's relevant differences between different like kinds of miracle claims.
Moreover, I think we can say that the resurrection has a higher prior probability than these other, supposed miracles. And there I would just appeal to Swinburne's work, where he argues that we have prior reason to think that God would become incarnate because he wants to share in our suffering. He wants to provide atonement for sin, show us how to lead a moral life, etc. So yeah.
Yeah, no, that's good stuff. Oh shoot, I'm like on the wrong tab. Let's pull up this next clip, and we have only a few more clips left, so we're making good progress. And if you're listening, I hope you found this edifying and useful. And yeah.
But why? Because in principle, there is nothing categorically impossible or different about the empirically verifiable miracles happening versus any of the other kind. In fact, all of the kinds of miracles are exactly on a par for God to enact. The fact that the kind of repeated, empirically verifiable demonstrations of otherwise physically impossible miracles would be the best kind of evidence for a supernatural being. And if such miracles were only able to be performed by followers of one religion, then it would constitute incredible evidence for the truth of that religion over the others. Why? Because then our experience of the world would give us contemporary evidence to interpret miracle claims from the past and allow us to discern between the wide variety of miracle claims of contradictory religions. This is a case where absence of evidence is evidence of absence. We are told that miracles of this sort used to occur in the past. The Christian Bible portrays the apostles and prophets performing verifiable miracles, some even after Jesus' death. We are given no reason to believe that these types of miracles should have stopped occurring while the other non-verifiable ones supposedly continue. Yet we don't see verifiable miracles occurring, so their contemporary absence counts against the historical claims being true. This is one of the principles that justifies the use of what is called methodological naturalism, the idea that in science, history, and other areas of study, as part of our methodology, we presume that metaphysical naturalism is true. Much like a random person telling you God whisked them away to the moon for lunch with Jesus and then sent them back in time for dinner at home, we disregard these unverifiable miracle claims. Note that this is the case even if we are a theist. Theists would reject my law.
Okay, so I just want to go first here, Bram. I'm gonna go first here,
Yeah, okay.
Because I was just thinking about this. So like one hypothetical situations aren't always the most helpful, but like he's just assuming that like most people don't believe in miracles again, which is like no, like I'm gonna block that notion. Like my sister was in Zambia for a few months. Like I think it'd be very hard pressed to find many people at all in Zambia who like deny the existence of miracles. Like this is a very like Western post-Enlightenment idea that like miracles don't happen. And like you talk to like we've talked about like Caleb Jackson or like Craig Keener, like there's other people that seem to have these documentations and you can do with them what you want, but like this idea that it's just like these things don't happen and there's no reason to think they do is, well, I don't think he would say that there's no reason to think they would happen. It's just that like he's gonna say, well, like it seems like we just have this uniform experience. It's like, well, most people don't believe that, so like I don't think it's gonna really help his argument.
Yeah, I would just echo what you just said there. And I don't think we need to resort to methodological naturalism in order to explain why we, intuitively know that we should dismiss, the absurd scenario that he gave. In that scenario, it would just be, well, I would just ask, like, what evidential basis do we have that it happened? And there I would say, yeah, you probably can weigh your background evidence against the value of the testimony, and you can go through and see, okay, is it more plausible that the person who's testifying is lying, or that he was deceived, or that it actually happened, and so on. But you don't need to resort to methodological naturalism in order to dismiss that. I don't even know if that's exactly what he's saying, but yeah.
Yeah, it's good stuff. Let's get into this final clip, and then we can sum things up. And I almost didn't put the last clip up on the screen, and then John would probably be like sad at me forever. And I hope we'd still be friends.
My lunch on the moon claim just as much as an atheist would, and for the same reasons. They just make a special exemption for their specific miracle claims. And when pushed why they make an exemption for their preferred miracles, the only answer they can resort to is their subjective religious experience. While this may provide a rational basis for their specific beliefs, it carries no weight when convincing someone else, because every religion's believers have contradicting subjective religious experience to justify belief in their miracles.
Okay, the only thing I'd add here, because we covered like the diverging like religious claims of like miracles and whatnot, like this is only a problem if you say only your like particular religion has miracles, which I mean, I'm sure there's some Christians that believe that like, well, all the like Muslims and Hindus and Buddhists and everyone else who claims that there's miracles, like they're all just lying, or it's like those are all like natural explanations. But like if you don't accept that, which I don't think most Christians are going to, like this isn't a problem. Like you can have religiously divergent miracles. It seems like the biblical thing if you believe that God created other like supernatural beings. So that's the only thing I'd have to add with regard to that.
Yeah, I'd agree with you there. Ooh, that came out really sloppy. I'd agree with you there. I think I had something. I was still swallowing some decaf coffee, so.
Yeah, and I've been talking really fast, and I'm sorry, guys. I need sleep, so pray for me if you're listening. Yep. Yeah, I guess, like if you believe in miracles, like Zach will sleep 8 hours tonight, maybe, maybe potentially.
Well, I woke up at 5 this morning, so I'm very tired too.
God bless you, Bram.
Thank you.
So we're at the end, which I'm actually kind of amazed that we got through this in 49 minutes. Hopefully we didn't rush through or anything. Like, Bram, do you have any kind of like last thoughts or things you want to say with regards to this clip? Or not this clip, but like this like response as a total?
Yeah. Well, I do have to say that, the philosophy of miracles is not my strong area. I'm probably going to have a lot more to say in part 2 when we actually go through the posterior historical evidence. But yeah, I think that I would summarize my case against his case against the resurrection as one, his unstated assumption about how we calculate the prior probability of Jesus' resurrection just by looking at how many people in your experience don't rise from the dead is not how one should go about doing this. We should look at reasons for why we should expect God to raise Jesus from the dead or not raise Jesus from the dead, because given Jesus' unique character, I think he belongs in a different reference class for comparison. And secondly, the first prong of his trilemma, which he brought up twice, I think, so far, we should reject as well, because it proposes, a false dichotomy. Either you have to accept all miracle claims at face value or accept none of them. And I listed 7 criteria that we can use to distinguish between trustworthy miracle claims and non-trustworthy miracle claims. And so, yeah. And I don't buy the assumption as well that all these miracles are on, or that all these miracles are equally well substantiated. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's helpful. I think I'll just highlight a few of my like main disagreements. One, I'm going to disagree that like the Christian or like someone else has to reject like miracles occurring in other religions. Like if your worldview allows for like supernatural beings that can impact other religions, then you don't have to like block this notion of miracles happening in other religions. I think there's going to be a relevant difference when we're looking at like religiously significant miracles. Like, so like for the mere theist or someone like that, like if you assume that God exists and he created the universe, like, well, maybe he'd have some reason for like verifying like a religiously significant miracle, like a resurrection, or you could use that to other religions. Because that's how like maybe like God wanted to reveal himself to the world, showing like, hey, I created this and like follow this path.
Yep.
So those are probably like my 2 biggest things. And we highlighted some of the other ones. I do want to say like, I chose this video, like not because like, I think it's like some like easy knockdown video, but because I think like John has a really valuable opinion. And like, these are things that aren't like talked about. Like, because if there's like an infinitely small prior probability of a resurrection, it doesn't really matter how good your evidence is, because you have to overcome that really low prior. So like that's one of the reasons I chose this is like he brings up some points worth thinking about. It's just like we disagree. And yeah, we can dialogue. This is part of just searching for truth, and I appreciate John a lot. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're much easier videos you could have chosen. Trust me. There's some really, really bad ones out there on YouTube, and this is one of the better ones. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I really hope that I sounded cogent. Like I was worried as I was talking to him, like, am I going to be so sleep deprived that like I don't make sense? But yeah, enough about me. It's been so much fun, Bram.
I was worried about that too. Honestly, we're in the same boat. I'm probably gonna look back on this this interview tomorrow, and I'm gonna be like, what was I talking about? I was in a different mental state.
This is why I take notes, because it helps me kind of keep track of my thoughts, and I don't just like come up with something like off the cuff, and it's like, oh yeah. So good stuff, Bram. Yeah, I mean, you're linked down below. You can follow us, and yeah, it's been a lot of great fun, and I appreciate everyone who tuning in. To Caleb and Sudo and Kelvy and John and everyone else. Wish you the best. Have a good one, and yeah, thanks, Bram. Thanks again for coming on.
Bye, Zach. Thank you.
And have a good one, everyone. God bless.